Well, I'm going to call the meeting to order for the Silver Falls School District Budget Committee, meeting number 3. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you all being here tonight. Debbie, I assume you can note attendance here a little bit easier with our new setup here on Zoom.
Noted.
Perfect. So I am going to, there's a little bit of a statement I want to read regarding our technology change here tonight. So Debbie, if you could throw that up on the screen, I'll read through that just to let everybody know kind of the format here. I'll say welcome again, everybody. You may or may not be aware that last budget meeting, someone joined just before our meeting and began shouting profanity, and another person joined and changed their profile picture from a black background to an inappropriate image. Fortunately, both persons were removed by our meeting host within seconds, and their accounts were reported to Zoom. This type of public interruption is sometimes referred to as Zoom bombing, and it's difficult to avoid with public meetings, as the connection information must be shared publicly, and members of the public are invited to attend. As was mentioned last meeting, within this new environment, it's important for us to revisit established norms of engagement in this online system, especially as technology tools like Zoom and other platforms are updated. So tonight, you'll likely notice that you were required to pre-register for the Zoom webinar. In contrast with Zoom meetings, Zoom webinar requires the selection of panelists from those that register and join the meeting, and requires attendees to ask to speak to allow their microphone button to be activated during public comment periods. Chat is still not at the bottom of your screen, and attendees are not visible alongside webinar panelists. These changes are necessary to keep everyone safe and communicating effectively. As always, please allow for brief delays as folks turn on and off their microphones to speak, and we ask that panelists stay muted when you're not speaking to improve the quality of audio in our meetings. Attendees will need to request to have your microphone enabled to participate during those times during the meeting. Later in the meeting here, towards the end, we will have a section for public comment. So in order to make a public comment, please email Debbie Voloff at the address there, at least 5 minutes before the public comment period, and your microphone will be enabled when your name is called upon. During designated public comment periods, please be patient as we respond as quick as possible to requests by attendees to interact with the panel, the board, and budget committee members. Thanks in advance for your patience as we get started and with the upgraded Zoom webinar, and we appreciate you Zooming in tonight. So hopefully this will make our meeting a little bit more efficient, and again, protect us from any unwanted visitors that they may try to do some inappropriate things during our meeting. So second thing I just wanted to kind of call to note is, as last week we did talk about, having a standard of conduct and standard of how we want to conduct ourselves in our meetings. The one thing I want to just bring us all back to, and that's just this idea of kindness, that all our responses, that all our discussions, that all our questions amongst our budget committee and with our staff just be bathed in an air of kindness. Unfortunately, I feel like a few times last meeting, we lacked a little bit of kindness in some responses. And agree, I think we all can agree, we hold ourselves to a very high standard in our conduct. And if we could just really put on that air of kindness amongst one another at this meeting, I think we can have a much more effective and positive outcome for our meeting tonight. The next thing I wanted to take a note of, and it dovetails into number 3 on our agenda, and that's with our correspondence, and specifically the letter, the collection of letters we as a budget committee received from our SFEA leadership and our membership. I want to thank our SFEA leadership and representatives that sent that on to us. Thank you, on behalf of the budget committee and the board, thank you for the input. Very valuable, and just want to reiterate that your input was heard. And it was taken very much into heart, into consideration. Again, those letters were shared collectively with the budget committee and with the board, and those concerns were definitely noted. In fact, just to really hone in on some of those concerns, Dan Bush and I had a chance to meet up with Michelle Stadley and Frank Petrick the last few days. First yesterday and then again this morning to vet any of the concerns that they had and to discuss them in detail. And then also this morning to share a little bit about what we're going to discuss tonight and then to ease some of their concerns. So I want to extend a sincere thank you to Michelle and to Frank for the very valuable discussion and feedback that the collective SFEA has provided our budget committee. With that, next item on the agenda is the review and approval of the meeting minutes from May 21st, our last budget committee meeting. Any questions or thoughts on the review or any motion to approve the minutes?
I will make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Thanks, Nicole. It's been moved. A second? I'll go ahead and second that. So we'll go ahead and go through and vote. Debbie, do you want to do the same format as last time?
Yes. Jonathan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Janet?
Abstain. I've not had a chance to review them.
Tom?
Aye, yes.
Lori? I see you. Thank you. Shelley?
Debbie, this is Paul. Shelley is unable to speak tonight, so I will be her voice, and she's emailing me responses. She votes yay on this.
Thank you, Shelley. Irv?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charles?
Abstain.
Jacob?
I'm going to abstain as I was not part of the whole meeting.
Okay. Peter?
Yes.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yes.
Nicole? Yes. And Robin?
Yes.
Okay, moved and seconded and passed. Okay, on to some of the more pertinent content here tonight. We'll have an update on our school funding and other key information, and I'm going to turn it over to both Paul and to Steve to provide that for us.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to start just by thanking everybody for your patience and your grace as we go, as we've been on this little bit of a roller coaster here with the budget. So last time we met, it was a day after some really devastating news came out. And so since that time, we're hearing information coming out of Salem and some predictions that seem to be pretty consistent from the folks that I'm hearing from about where they think we're going to land. So what that looks like as of today, about an hour ago when I talked with the COSA lobbyist, Morgan Allen, is that it appears that the governor and the legislative leaders have quite a lot of concern over the next two bienniums, as I shared some of that with you last time, and they are appearing to be leaning towards tapping the majority of the student investment account to fill the budget gap that we have right now. So the concern about the future is causing them to want to hang on to the majority of the Education Stability Fund and the Rainy Day Fund and use that to bolster up the state school fund for the next two bienniums. And so this year, it does look like, by everybody I've talked to, that there is a pathway that is very reasonable to keep us at the $9 billion funding level for the state. So about 95% of the school districts right now that are going through this same process are passing and approving their budgets, just like we are going to try to do tonight. So with that information, I am going to recommend to you all that the budget committee approve the proposed budget as it was first presented, because it was based on that $9 billion funding level. And here in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he's going to share with you some additional information and a graph to show you how we're able to sustain ourselves even with a little bit of shortfall in the state school fund to keep us at that funding level that was first. You might recall when we first presented the proposed budget to you back in April, we said that, hey, this is built upon the revenue forecast in the state school fund that came out in February. Well, the bottom line is that as of today, the Department of Education has kept the state school fund estimate officially at that exact same level, which is a strong indication to us all that they believe they're going to fill the funding gap. So with that, I'm going to ask Steve to share with you. He's got a great graph, some good information to kind of demonstrate to you how we really are going to be okay. We're not going to be needing to make any big cuts or reductions in layoffs, and we're going to be in good shape. So Steve, why don't you take it from here, and let's see that awesome graph.
Good evening, everyone. Before I show the graphic that I prepared on our scenarios and such, I just had a couple things I wanted to say. Paul kind of summed what's going on at the state level really well. I just wanted to mention that since we started this on April 28th, when we had the grimmest of news, potential $654 million hit to the state school fund, which meant $4 million to Silver Falls School District next year. We've now, in the last 35 days, made up 55% of that gap. So we've gone from a worst case scenario of negative $4 million to now down to $1.8 million. So we've bridged the gap by $2.2 million. $1 million of that savings has to do with the fact that the state forecast that came out on May 20th that we discussed in our last meeting on May 21st was better than expected. Instead of a $654 million hole, it was a $490 million hole. So that improved our situation by $1 million. And then Silver Falls School District specifically has taken actions, which again we discussed last meeting, to help us save an additional $1.2 million heading in to next year. So the furlough days, the 5 furlough days that we're taking right now saves us $600,000. Federal CARES Act money, so the federal government has a part in this. We will be getting those funds in at some point here in the next few months. The final allocations haven't been released yet, but we're looking at about $350,000 there. And then lastly, we have achieved some other savings since the closure with sub-cost transportation and some other items. So we're able to improve our situation at the end of this year that essentially helps us for next year. So that basically has saved us $364 million of the $654 million original problem, or 55%. So we've gone from a $4 million problem locally to a $1.8 million gap. So the two key the other key statement is that I want to make is because we have $200 million that we've taken care of locally with federal CARES Act money, as well as our furlough days and other savings, we have the ability to spend at our proposed budget level, which was again based on the $9 billion level. Even if the state says you're only going to get funded at 8.8 billion. Again, that hasn't happened yet. Our official estimate's still at 9.0. But we have the ability to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to my graph, and I'll explain a few more things here. Can everyone see a column graph? Yes? Okay, thank you. So this graph here represents, on the left, our ODE official state school fund estimate for the year 2020-2021. based on the $9.0 billion level. It came out on February 25th. And I'll flash that up on the screen here in a moment. But basically, this is what the budget was built off of. And we're over 3 months later, and that's still our official estimate from ODE. We know that that could still be reduced. Right now, that's simply conjecture. Obviously, if you look at our graph, this was the grim information we were looking at here on the bottom right as of April 28th, based on Governor Brown's minus 17% reductions that she was having state agencies do. So when they applied a 17% reduction, 8.5% condensed into 1 year, 17% into 1 year, we were looking at that minus 654 million. So you can see that label down here. So you can see the difference of $4 million from the top to the bottom, specifically for Silver Falls. So what has specifically happened since then, I just summarized before I showed the graph. And the way that I thought I would show this is that there's things happening kind of in both directions. One is there was improvement at the state level. Obviously, the state forecast on May 20th was not as bad as feared for 2021. Of course, we've got some big problems as they stand for the next 4 years after, but that improved, again, the situation from $654 million state school fund reduction to $490 million. So this effectively became our new kind of state school fund worst case scenario. Then Silver Falls, along with receiving some federal CARES Act money here in the near future, has been able to, we've been able to save money heading into next year. So that will effectively build our ending fund balance at the end of this year from where we budgeted that at, and we would be able to use that money to help us for next year. So essentially, this green bar here represents our state school fund amount at a $8.8 billion funding level, minus $200 million. So like I was saying, we could essentially absorb an $8.8 billion funding level for next year and still spend at the $9 billion level that we have in our proposed budget and still keep our ending fund balance at least a $2.5 million minimum. Now, that leaves us with the remaining gap. That represents $290 million, or for us, $1.8 million. The first step that has to be taken now is we have to look to the state. From our understanding, we're hearing that the legislators may not be called for a special session until at least the week of the 15th. There's three, as Paul mentioned, three potential areas that they could draw upon to help make up this remaining gap. The Education Stability Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, which those two funds combined, again, represent $1.75 billion at the state level. And also the talk about the new student investment account money, which is down, it's either 35 or 37% from the March forecast, being able to pull some or all of that in to bring to secure the state school fund level at the $9 billion. So we really have to wait to see what the state is going to do before we decide what specific actions, if needed, are to be taken on our part, which I've listed here and we've talked about in the first two meetings. You know, further use of reserves, question mark. Furlough days in 2021, question mark. Programmatic or FTE reductions, question mark. Again, these would all happen not until further discussion around this, and we obviously can discuss what priorities they would come in tonight further, but we really need to wait to see what happens at the state level, because if they backfill the rest of this gap, then we won't have to go any farther. That then actually begs the question of what we thought was impossible on April 28th. We were all sitting here going $654 million, $4 million for Silver Falls. There was no way that we could even fathom being funded at $9 billion. Well, what if they do? Well, we've saved, $600,000 of furlough days, and we're going to get some federal CARES Act money, et cetera. Well, what I feel is we've now better positioned ourselves for the next 2 to 5 years out if they don't cut the $9 billion spending level for next year, and that's a great thing beyond 2021. So I hope that makes sense. And really, Superintendent Peterson talked about the recommendation to approve the budget, at least the revenue side, at the $9 billion level. And I really have a strong belief in that, only because, we've come 35 days along, and our official ODE estimate is 94 days old, and it's still at $9 billion. And we're probably not going to find out more until most likely the week of the 15th or after. And this committee we won't be able to approve the budget past the 16th to be able to get it adopted by the board by the 30th. So to me, it doesn't make sense to approve a budget with less revenue than what we're being given officially by the Oregon Department of Education. We could ratchet it down if we were to get cut, or if we find out something between budget approval and budget adoption, we could officially make that change to the final appropriation and adoption of the budget. But with the other reason is because we've already built in a way to absorb a $200 million cut to the state school fund and not have to make an adjustment to the budget. So those are the reasons why, at least from my chair, I would recommend that action tonight. That's really all I wanted to cover, and I hope that this graphic makes sense, and I would definitely love to answer any questions you may have, because there's a lot of things going on here, and I know there was different ways that I could have presented it for sure, but hopefully it's helpful.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. I think that was a great summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I have a question for Aaron. Aaron, how do you want us to raise our hands? Because I don't think we have the raise hand function, or if we do, I can't see it. So somebody might have the same question, but how do you want us to proceed in terms of speaking time?
Great question, because I don't see it. I popped up the participants window and I don't see it like we've had before. Drew, do you want to answer that, or how should we do that? I think there's a small enough group here. Maybe we could just kind of gently speak up. But Drew, do you have any other suggestions that we could silently signal we'd like to speak?
Yeah, that's what you got. Microphone button on and off. Video. You could turn on your video on and off. That's
sure.
all you got.
We'll do, then Jennifer, we'll do it the old-fashioned way, and we'll just just gently interject like you just did. So that, if that's okay with you. Okay.
Jennifer, did you have a question?
No, I am happy to make a motion though, unless we want to get more questions for Steve first.
Is this an appropriate time to speak?
Absolutely, Charles. Love to hear from you.
Steve, you're making a request, or the superintendent is making a request that we approve the budget that was presented to us on the 28th. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you're also stating that you really don't know what the revenue numbers are going to be, and that the budget in all likelihood could change if your assumptions are off to any degree. Is that correct?
Our official estimate is $9.0 billion, and we have the ability to serve as presented in the budget on the expenditure side, even if the state were to tell us that our funding level is only $8.8 billion. If we find out later in June or into July that they're not going to fill in, essentially the state gap right now is officially is 490 million, but we've already taken care of 200 million of that. If for some reason they come back and say, nope, the state school fund's only going to be 8.6 or 8.5 billion, and we haven't answered we have to account for all this gap, and they're not going to do anything for us here, then that's where we're going to have to start making other choices and decisions. But I really don't believe we're going to have those definitive answers before the committee needs to approve the budget in terms of our timeline for adoption and being able to open the doors for business on July 1st.
All right, I think I understand that. So in fact, what you're telling me as a budget committee member is that whenever the final budget comes to a point where it can be reliably determined, the budget committee will have approved the budget, but will no longer be meeting to consider any changes to it. Is that correct?
Well, once the budget is approved in this process, and the other important step is that the tax rate and the levy amount is set in the approval process. That process is over, but I believe that because there's still a lot of uncertainty, it would be up to Mr. Drew as well as the board to say, hey, for the budget committee members that want to, come back and meet in July or August, depending on when we kind of know more information, if we were needing to take additional steps, it wouldn't not be an unreasonable thought to bring the committee back together to have discussions outside the formalized state process. That's a local decision that certainly can be made, and some districts do that in some way, shape, or form. I think it's a way to keep a dialogue moving throughout the year, to at least have some updates with the budget committee. It's also my job as the business manager each month when I give my financial statements to the board to give updates. And obviously there could be little changes that are don't necessarily rise to the budget or board committee level per se, but clearly there's some things here that could very well rise to that level and may necessitate bringing the group back together.
Are you recommending that the budget committee reconvene in the eventuality that the budget needs to be amended in any way that you're envisioning? You've mentioned furlough days, you've mentioned classroom size, you've mentioned several possibilities under the most dire circumstances.
Right.
We're obviously being asked to approve a budget that doesn't qualify as a dire circumstance in terms of the revenue side and therefore the expenditure side.
I think,
if that eventuality arises, then the budget committee will have approved something that is unrealistic and will not be in a position to approve something that is realistic.
Yeah. I obviously need to leave the decision up to our school board as well as Scott Drew moving forward, but I certainly am always in favor or welcome, the more the merrier, and I think the budget committee, it's a good way to keep everyone on board with what's going on and have input, and I think that's always a good thing. So
yeah, I'll jump in here for a minute. Charles, it's a great question, and it's something that we're going to be bringing up at a meeting, probably one of the next two board meetings, to be discussing, some ideas around those types of plans, maybe creating we're officially requesting a small working group to provide that kind of input to Steve and to Mr. Drew and to others as we begin sort of learning more information. That it's going to be an ongoing process. Officially, this budget committee's role is to approve the budget. That has to be done by the end of this month. And at that point, officially, this committee really doesn't have any formal input remaining. That's not to mean anybody, you know, we could construct a working group that contained members of this committee, and I think it would be wise to do that. But officially, right, this group does in fact have one job, which is to approve and or to request modifications to the budget. And, you know, I think we're hearing a recommendation from Steve and from Paul tonight on what they'd like to see this committee do.
If I could also interject too, Jonathan, thanks. And Charles, thanks for your question about that. I wanted to throw out there too, after, Steve was allowed to share, the granular data here that, we are covered up to that $200 million shortfall. If it exceeds that, I wanted to put a placeholder and make a recommendation to the board that we do bring back the budget committee at some point in July or early August to reconvene and to see what that looks like, and to see, if it is even more than the $290 million shortfall, or at that level, there might be some other thoughts. Just also to kind of put it out there, and I don't want to steal Steve's thunder at all here, because he and Paul put a ton of work into this, and I had a chance to just meet with them yesterday and prep for the meeting. But even at that highest level funding reduction, there is enough in some of the things like the carryover from the furloughs that we had this year, the addition of one or more other furlough days potentially as a discussion, as an option, and then also looking at our reserves, right, along with the CARES and along with some of the other resources that Stephen mentioned already in the previous slide. Those main areas too will also get us to that level. So I just wanted to put that out there that even at that highest level, we have ways that we can spare the drastic reductions by using some of the resources that we already have at our disposal. So yeah, and I don't know when it is to make this recommendation. I'll leave it up maybe I don't know if we have to make a motion if we want to meet again, but I would suggest that we do reconvene the budget committee at some point in July or early August, just to finalize and circle, even if it's at a grade funding level, just to cover off, even if it's a 30-minute Zoom meeting, just to circle the wagons. I think that would behoove us to do that.
I'd like to interject just a quick second. Shelley is saying to me via email that she can't hear some of you speak. Is everybody else raise your hand if you can hear Aaron when he's speaking okay? All right, so it does look like it's just you, Shelley. If you can disconnect and reconnect, maybe that might solve it. And I hope you're hearing me okay. Something to try anyways. All right, thank you.
Yeah, Lori.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe that Mr. Matska would like to speak. I just wanted to let you know it's a little hard to tell. I mean,
Peter, yeah, thanks, Peter. It's a
a
little dark there.
It's hard because there's so many people on the grid, and sometimes.
And please, if I don't see somebody, just yell at me and let me know. So I apologize. Peter, go ahead.
No worries.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm in a much better Wi-Fi location now, but in my basement, so it's a little dim and gloomy, which the budget doesn't seem to be as dim and gloomy this time around. But something that we did last year, and with the approval of the budget, was we had a list of priorities that actually were the opposite of what I am going to recommend, but they were if we got more funding, and I think that was through some of the $98. We had kind of this list of about 7 items that went down, maybe like some after school or some extra arts, that sort of thing. And the budget committee saw that and said, sent that on as these are the collective agreement. Those are priorities. And I would suggest that would be something nice to have with this much more promising budget projection now. But we should still have priorities as a committee for those. What are we going to consider cutting and in what order if it starts to get to that phase as a budget committee? And then the last piece on that, I think as a contingency on the approval, it would be nice if we could reconvene the budget committee and have that on there as something that, maybe not a requirement for everybody. I don't know how that would look, but some contingency that we do get together when there is more clarity in the budget. So we can reconvene. If it's like you said, Aaron, 30 minutes, that's great. But it would be nice to have that at least priority list or get back together and develop that priority list as a committee.
Thank you, Peter. Did I see anybody else? Lori, great, go for it.
I actually do have something to say. I like what I'm hearing, and I do appreciate what Mr. Matska said and also what Mr. Baldwin said. I, as a board member, would like to see a potential reconvene of the budget committee. I think the board will need to discuss that more, as Mr. Edmonds mentioned at a school board meeting. But I think with the time that we're in, it is very necessary that we take our time and be cautious. And I do like the idea of the priorities and how that would ultimately look in the future. Thank you.
Any other pieces of information or questions or thoughts? Or can you hear yet, Shelley?
Yes, she can hear, and she says that because this is a fluid situation, I like the idea of the line of communication and participation of the budget committee being able to reconvene if needed for future meetings. Thank you, she says.
Great, thanks, Shelley. Irv, go ahead, and then Jennifer next.
Yeah, I believe Jennifer made a motion. There's been some discussion. I would like to second it.
Oh, I didn't make the motion, but I can right now.
That'd be awesome.
I move that the Budget Committee of the Silver Falls School District approve the 2020-2021 fiscal year budget as proposed and set next year's tax levy rate at the permanent rate of $4.5458 per $1,000 of assessed value, and approve a tax levy of $4,217,938 for the purpose of retiring bonded debt of the district.
That I will second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded here. I just wanted to make sure that we're following a good order here. And just for a point of order, we do have some public comment that was listed on the agenda before the approval of the budget. So I want to make sure that those who weigh in from the public can weigh in before we make that approval. I think that'd probably be most proper. I want before with the motion on the table, I think we can still do that as part of the discussion period. I'm assuming that's okay with everybody here. So with that being said, and I don't hear many other comments by our budget committee, I am going to open.
Did everybody else just lose Aaron?
Yeah, I lost
It's just him.
If you're having difficulty, please let us know.
Aaron?
Yes.
Can you, we all lost you about 3 seconds after you started speaking, so you're gonna have to repeat all of that again.
Oh boy, okay.
I'm sure it was brilliant.
Did you hear, when I said we have a motion, I said as a point of order, did you miss everything after that?
Yes.
Okay, so as a point of order, we have a spot for public comment later before we approve the budget. And since it's been moved in second, maybe as part of our discussion, if you guys are all comfortable with it, I will open it up for public comment because I think it's important to hear public comment from our constituents before we approve the budget. And then we can even have further discussion if that needs to be before we do it. So with that, Drew, do we have any folks that have emailed in? And if you'd like to still get on and email your questions, please email them to Debbie Voloff. The email was provided at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, this is Debbie. My email address is also on the agenda near the public comment portion if anybody is looking for that. And I do have Michelle Stadley requesting to speak.
Great.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, it's great. Go for it, Michelle.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to jump on tonight just specifically to say thank you to Aaron and Dan for initiating a meeting with Frank Patrick and myself this week and just opening up that line of communication. We really appreciated your responsiveness and just your willingness to have those conversations with us. So I just wanted to thank you guys for that.
Thanks, Michelle. Again, likewise, we appreciate your dialogue and your suggestions and your time.
Aaron, I'm just refreshing to see if anybody else comes up.
And we'll take a little longer pause here as people continue to potentially write in.
Aaron, while we're waiting, before we cast the vote, could I make a few remarks?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Aaron, I'm not getting anybody else.
Okay, let me just give it one more minute just to make sure, okay?
And I just want to chime in too, Aaron, that I like the idea of the budget committee coming back in if there's something that comes up or just to kind of go over it. I like that idea. That makes me feel very comfortable with tonight. And I think it makes a lot of people feel really comfortable just to have those extra eyes and discussions and that communication. I really like that idea.
Agreed. Thanks, Robin.
And I appreciate that input. You know, it's something that we're going to have to discuss at a regular board meeting or a board work session. But having said that, it's good to hear from you guys tonight. So.
Anything else coming in, Debbie?
Nothing else.
Okay. Well, I think we've given it some time here, and we do have a motion to approve the budget. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? And I want to give the floor over to Charles because he does have something to say here.
I'm assuming that you all have received the emails that I've sent to Paul and to Steve and to you all. In those emails, I've outlined some things that I'm concerned about and would like to see happen over the course of any budget year. And so I'm a yes vote on the motion tonight with the understanding that the board is in fact going to create a pathway for the budget committee or a committee concerned with budget issues on their behalf to meet, I don't know how frequently, perhaps quarterly, to review the budget and matters relating to the budget over the course of a budget year. So I'm an aye vote, but I would definitely like to see the board act upon its intention to create some vehicle that allows us to monitor the budget over the course of the year.
Thank you, Charles. Appreciate that. Any other comments? Lori?
Yes, and I'm fairly new to this, so this will be directed to Mr. Edmonds. Do we need to dovetail the board's consideration for the budget committee to continue looking at the budget quarterly or so in this motion?
It won't be part of this motion, Lori, but we will be bringing it up, if not Monday, certainly at a meeting soon, right? So we will certainly bring up the topic. The board will have to decide how we want to proceed, but it sounds to me like there's broad agreement that some form of committee, be it this committee or some form of committee similar to this, will likely become a reality. But it's not going to be tied. It can't and shouldn't be tied to this motion.
Okay.
This is not a board meeting. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Peter.
Well, I guess Jonathan, you kind of answered the question I was just gonna ask, and that was to you said it will be tied to this, but and it'll be discussed. But what assurance do the members of this committee have, or the members of the public have, that it actually will, if we can't tie it to an approval with the understanding that something will be developed later, and we're not going to get into the specifics, but
yeah,
something.
It's a fair question, and the short answer is there is no assurance other than your sense that the board, through our words tonight, are generally seeming to be in alignment. But no, there is no formal assurance, nor really could there be, because this isn't a board meeting.
I'd also like to recommend that the board continue this conversation with Superintendent Drew when he gets on board. I think this is an idea that Steve and I have talked about and actually have been really open to, but I think it would be important to honor the wishes and the input of Superintendent Drew when he gets on board. And when the school board has its organizational meeting, it's called, in July, that is when those committees of the board are formed, and that's when that all gets decided. So that would probably be the ideal time to consider that. And for what it's worth, for me, I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing as there is none, let's take a vote. Debbie?
Jonathan?
I vote yes to approve the budget as presented.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Tom?
Aye.
Lori?
Yes.
Shelley? I could see you.
Shelley votes yay.
There we go. Shelley's a yes. Thumbs up. Thank you. Irv?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charles?
Aye.
Jacob? Jacob, you're muted.
Yes.
That's a yes.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Robin?
Yes.
Thank you. That's unanimous.
All right, seeing as that we've got everything accomplished that we needed to in terms of approval of the budget, we are concluded here. On behalf of everybody here, I just want to say thank you for your time, and everybody from our community that's hung with us here these last 3 meetings. Obviously, as many can attest to, probably one of the more interesting budget cycles we've ever been a part of. But thank you to everybody for your time, your input. I think we made some great progress, and hope to see you all next year, and have a good rest of your week. And thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.